You're listening to CRBRadio.com. The words and opinions you are about to hear are of the hosts and do not reflect the management, sponsors, or affiliates of Cave Radio Broadcast.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 401 show. Today is it's Rabbit Day. It's October 1st. Did your teachers ever used to do that, Helen? Where they would tell you to say rabbit. You know what? That's superstitious. What am I even doing?
Not that I recall.
Hi, Helen.
Hi.
We've got one of our old bandmates who just swung by out of the blue. Very nice to see you today.
Thanks.
We've also got Rachel behind the camera. Al is also behind the camera, but you're on air today, right? Your mic's on.
Yes, it is on.
Good.
I'm going to try to do all this at once.
Because we're going to need you to pipe in for sure.
Yeah.
We were laughing a little bit before we got on air because I'd said I was thinking about you today. You'd said the same thing. And I said, I'll tell you why. The most recent reason I was thinking about you is because I'm driving up on Telegraph. And I'm not really a vain person, but if you're going to be on air, you know, you're doing you check yourself in the mirror, right?
Right.
And like I've got this nose hair thing that is just, it's out of control. And I always associate it with being a Greek shipping tycoon.
Great.
So I'm sitting there on the way. I'm like, dude, I am in the wrong line. I should be working on the docks in Greece around ships with lots of hairy guys because that's. So my nose hair is going nuts. And so I started thinking, oh, my Greek friend Helen, I wonder how she's doing today.
Aw.
That was the connection.
That's great.
Aren't you glad we shared on air?
Yeah, thanks.
How's everyone doing? We're going to be talking about a very controversial document today called the Protocols of the Learned Elders, and there's often an of Zion added to the end of it, which is very important. We're going to talk about why in a minute. It is, when I say controversial, even discussing this document raises eyebrows. It can easily get you labeled as anti-Semitic or fear-mongering or whatever, things along those lines. But there's a reason there's a lot of pressure to keep us from looking at it. And I do not believe it is an anti-Semitic document. We're going to talk about why it is believed to be a Jewish document in the first place. We are also going to talk about why I personally do not believe that that is its origin, but it has fueled an incredible amount of hatred toward the Jews. There's no doubt about that. It certainly actually helped fuel some of the stuff going on in World War II. And it seems to be the guidelines of it's, in a sense, it's printing history before it happens. And I suspect it is a demonic document. But we'll be lucky if we can get through 4 or 5 protocols today. But we are going to be spending the last 80% of the show talking about that. Any questions about anything so far? Because I wanted to wrap up last week. We had Andrea Perrin on, and she was portrayed in The Conjuring. I think you said you listened to part of that show. Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen The Conjuring?
Yes, it's been a while, but so it's based on a haunted home?
Yes.
Okay.
Or a family that was haunted.
Okay.
I personally believe people are haunted, not homes. And they're not haunted by lost souls or just disembodied spirits. I personally believe those are demons posing as, you know, your grandfather's old soul. Personally. That's what the scriptures back up, and personal experience and a few other things that we're going to get into today. But one of the things that this show at the end of the day, it's the 401 show. And that 401 is a numerical representation for Jesus Christ. Because in the last chapter of the Bible, I believe it's the last chapter, it's in Revelation 22, it's in a couple places. One of the names Jesus gives himself he is the Aleph and the Tav. In the ancient Aramaic, the old Hebrew, which was later translated into Greek, into that Septuagint version of the Bible, which is the one scholars rely on because it is reliable. We're not going to get into why we know that, but that's not up for discussion. I was going somewhere with that. Septuagint.
Aleph and Tav is.
Oh, thank you.
Alpha and
Numerical
Omega.
representation of Jesus. When he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, he is the beginning and the end. He is A to Z. He was at the beginning of time, and he will be there at the end. He is the dividing line of all history. Gematria, which is the association of numerical values with letters. We probably know about it in Latin because, V stands for 5, and
Right.
I stands for 1, C stands for 100. 100. M's 1,000.
Was it 50?
C's 100.
I think it's L.
Was L 50?
And the reason I know is because the Patriots won Super Bowl XL.
It's either that or Metro Goldwyn Mayer movies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They spell it out. So one of his numerical values, the numerical value of Aleph was 400. I'm sorry, of Tav. Numerical value of Aleph or Alpha is 1. Numerical value of Tav, which is the equivalent of Omega. In Greek, Tav has a value of 400. I'm sorry. In Hebrew, it has a value of 400. In Greek, it is 800. So two of the numbers that theoretically represent God would be 401 and 801. And I haven't taken the time to do this yet, but I've been told that when you go back and look at all of the different names God gives himself, the numerical value of each adds up to the same. Whether he's calling himself the Son of Man, the Prince of Peace, whatever the words were in the original Aramaic. There's a lot of synchronicity in that book along those lines.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that, there's a rock and a hard place sometimes where this show is. Because on one hand, I want to have an open debate about things. And I want to spur conversation of the things.
It's usually after the show, by the way.
What?
The open debate.
True.
That's the post-show discussion usually is the open debate.
I would love that to be the show, but that's really close to the show. I mean, no one's really button-lipped around here, which is
Right.
great. Oh, and by the way, Katie and Cody are out today. We miss you guys. We will see you guys soon. I hope, Katie, you feel better. Melissa is still in the West Coast on assignment. All right, so what were you asking me about then?
Oh, no, I was just stating that the open floor discussion is usually after the show. That's when we really get into it because we're pressed for time usually. Mm-hmm. So we don't really get to debate as much as probably we'd like to because of the time constraints of the show.
Right. And so I walked out of last week's show. It was a great interview. And Andrea Perrion, great guest, wonderful. I thank her very much for appearing. I think she and Katie actually made a pretty good connection. I wouldn't be surprised if they're friends.
Katie did a great job on her due diligence.
She did. Her research was dynamite.
Yep.
And that really is 90% of anything you do. It's just hard. It's the stuff no one sees. It's the quiet stuff that makes everything appear smooth when it's visible. And I was really impressed with that. She did a really good job. Nonetheless, so what I was saying, there was something, I was upset after that show. It was bothering me. I felt like I needed to address something. And here's the catch-22 that I feel. Because on one hand, the show has the name of Jesus Christ on it, because as long as I'm behind it, that's the purpose of this show. It's not Doesn't have my name or any person's name. It is about the glory of God, not about ours. And everything that happens here is in his name, which is why we're always trying to be extra careful about appearances, whether we're drinking beer or not, things of that nature. And I always want to respect that. I also always want to respect the idea of having an open forum where we can have discussions about things. So in terms of our guest last week, her experience, I absolutely believe her experience. I absolutely believe that she, without a doubt, she was exposed to the spiritual world in its most physical form, which it can take physical earthly forms. Now, everything in there, we agree on everything, except for perhaps one thing, which is our take from that scenario, which her take was that she had befriended this spiritual entity. She acknowledges the spiritual entity is real and is there, has a relationship, a positive one apparently. And I don't doubt that either. Where we divide, for me, is where, I guess you could say it's where I put my faith. Because you got two choices here. You can put your faith in these entities, which, just by their secretive nature, there's a deceptive element to them. And I don't care if we are talking about spirits, disembodied souls, or even if we're talking about little green men visiting from another place. If I had to choose where to put my faith, and you have a choice to make between, so the message that these entities had was a message of love and unity, and it's basically how they're going to bring in the new world order. Satan is not going to come at us with the evil. He's not going to come with a pitchfork. It's going to feel right. I guarantee you it's going to feel right. Everything is about what is coming up on this earth in the near future. There's just not a doubt in my mind that it's something on the rise, and I think it's something that certainly my son, maybe even the people in this room, are going to have to deal with in their lifetime. So the big difference where I respectfully divert away from Andrea last week, is that I just don't believe that she should trust these entities she's dealing with. If she were to put her faith in anything, I would put it, my faith is in this book, which predicted without a mistake, and this is the important part, because if there had been even one mistake, I could not say this with fervor. Everything about the future was predicted with zero mistakes in this book, which is what authenticates it. And this book is so clear about us dealing with other entities or dealing with channelers or mediums. And I'm going to read a couple of... First of all, any thoughts or comments on what I just said?
I have a question. I'll play devil's advocate today since Charles isn't here. What about someone who spends their entire life with, say, an entity or whatever, within the same household or whatever, and never has a negative experience up until death? At that point, do you wonder what if there was deception there, if this was demons at work and that's how they're going to get their way in or whatever? What would be the point of continuing that all the way up through death without any negativity, without any disruption, without any harmful things happening?
What would be the point?
Yeah, well, I mean...
Well, the way the demonic kingdom works. So I'm going to synthesize a bunch of scripture and maybe some anecdotal experience that has been observed. Give me your question again.
Okay, so a lot of these experiences, they start off in a negative manner. You say that, according to the Bible, that this is the way this is the way it's going to happen, or at least in your opinion, this is the way it's going to happen. They're not going to come, with pitchfork and evil. It's going to be something that convinces you that they're trustworthy and whatnot. So at some point, something has to flip. They have to either flip you to believe that, okay, this entity is friendly, and at that point, if they're manipulating you to that point, then it has to become something, and it has to turn into something. What is the point of manipulation if it never amounts to anything and that person eventually passes away? What was the point of that if it is deception and it is a demon?
Understood.
Or whatnot?
Okay.
You know what I mean?
So the main goal of what the demonic kingdom operates on is capturing your soul. They don't care so much about your physical well-being. They don't care if you live a good life or have a crappy one. They don't care. What they are told to care about is capturing souls for Satan. And it's not that they have to capture anything, because thank you, Adam and Eve, but we're born disqualified from heaven. Because heaven is essentially, it's like a clean room, okay, like where they build microchips. And because of something Adam and Eve did, we got particles, bacteria on us. And in some cases, we can't even see it. Now, we might look over at someone like Hitler, who's obviously evil, and we can see dirt all over him. Okay, not getting into heaven based on what we know. A lot of us compare ourselves to that and have this false sense of security of, we're just going to be able to, glide right in, because we assume that we have to disqualify ourselves in this life, when the whole message of the Bible is the exact opposite, is that essentially this whole, I'm going to do sci-fi talk here, but a whole species of people, a crop of them, us, was lost when Adam and Eve did whatever it was that they did that caused them to fall. Something had us on the same plane as God, where we could interface with him without being harmed. We could be in his presence. Maybe this explains why 80-some% of our DNA, and Rachel, you might have numbers being in the medical field, is dormant. It's just not, or it just doesn't do anything. Why?
80% of what?
Of our DNA.
Okay.
So now that we've mapped the human genome over the hey Polly, over the 80s and 90s, we now know what every node on the helix does. Some of it determines eye color. Some determines our size, our abilities, everything. But we can't find what the vast majority of this DNA is supposed to do. Now, these are actual plans. And this is one of the reasons that, for me, I used to believe evolution, but evolution just got tossed out the window, because mathematically it's impossible for a simple cell to exist with a very complex code,
Well,
15 billion lines of it. It can't come together. What's that?
it's all coded. It's all connected. We're all connected somehow in it, and I
Exactly.
do believe evolution is connected into it too.
Well,
But
there's-
there is a bigger plan to that that nobody can really,
And I should make that distinction.
boil down to. I mean,
The human DNA is very similar to a lot of animal DNA.
Yes.
Like it's just 1 or 2 or 3 items off.
Yeah,
or
like
whatever.
we're
Like,
only
it's-
1% of our DNA away from an ape.
Right.
We share something like 60% of DNA with a plant. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Which, depending on how you look at things, can be used as an argument for evolution when you see everything evolved from. But you can also use it to argue, well, of course they share the same framework. They were designed at the same factory. So there are some types of evolution we have observed, and that is creatures adapting to their local environment, which is often called microevolution. Macroevolution, which is jumping species, we've never observed it, ever. If Earth is 5 billion years old and there's 15 billion lines of DNA code, that means we need 3 successful mutations every single year from the beginning of time, assuming humans were here at the beginning of time. Which means in our lifetimes alone, let's say 50 years, we should have seen 150 successful mutations. If evolution, we should have observed it, scientifically should have observed it. But we haven't. In fact, it's just the opposite. When the doctor comes out and says, hey, your baby has a genetic mutation, the parents freak out. They're not excited about what superpowers this kid has.
Right.
And it does not help.
It's not in the majority, right? So it's not looked at as something that's
What's not
normal.
majority? What do you mean that's not?
If they have something off about what you were just saying, you know, if you're
Like a
baby's
genetic
born and
defect,
yes, they
yeah.
have a genetic defect. It's not looked at something that, you know, it's looked at something that's abnormal.
There are
whether
some
or
cases
not-
I could think of where it could be viewed as a benefit. In some cases where you've got
Like
Asperger's
right,
or
children.
autistic.
I mean, some of them
They've
are
got incredible
geniuses.
computing skills.
Yes.
Which is interesting because that sort of tells you what the mind might be capable of. And maybe we're just being shown what it's really capable of when it's not under this demonic wet blanket, which is everything from the fluoride in the water we drink to the G5 waves coming out of these new towers to the GMOs in our foods. I mean, we're under physical attack.
Right.
We're also under spiritual attack. So, Al, to answer your question, why would a demon hang around a woman or a person their whole life, not disrupt it, never, cause a problem? The reason a demon would do that is because if that person's on their way to hell already, the demon's not going to do a damn thing. The way they work, and there's a lot of scripture to this, is the Satan's army operates like a human army does. They each have responsibilities. There are hierarchies. There are different levels. In Revelation 6:11, when it says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and authorities." Those are ranks of angels. That's who our real battle is against. It's a spiritual battle, which our guest last week, Andrea Perrin, she's now gotten a front row view on. She wouldn't be the first person in the Bible to be tricked by demons. But at the end of the day, if you're going to ask where I put my faith, I would rather trust what's written in this book, which I have yet to find someone that can disprove to me that these are the words of God. I would rather put my faith in this book than in what some creatures that had been haunting this woman, that are hiding in corners, or if they're visiting our planet, are doing it secretly and have been doing it for 50, 60 years, whatever, that I don't want to put my faith in whatever that is.
See, here's where I have a problem. It's not just, there's got to be balance. There's got to be good and evil, right? So we'll go back to the sweet old lady analogy. Let's say she goes to church every Sunday, believes in God, says her prayers every night before she goes to bed, still interacts with this entity. In her mind, she's thinking this is some kind of angel, right? I have a real hard time believing that because she's putting faith in this entity, thinking that it's an angel, that she's not going to get into heaven when the day comes that she dies, because this was a quote-unquote demon the whole time, and she put faith into this demon because in her mind, in her heart,
Understood
in
what
her
you're saying.
soul, she thought this was some kind of angel. There was no reason for her not to believe
Great question. So God does care about intentions. And we're tried based on what we know. So if you sin without knowledge, that's a C+.
But it goes back to your point that if she were already going to hell, that's why that entity would stay, But if not, like, I'm sure in the grand scheme of things, there are very more vulnerable people out there that would be less time consuming and more effective than sweet little, Mabel that goes to church every Sunday and thinks she's got a guardian angel.
Like, you could dive so deep into this right now.
Mm-hmm.
Given, not sure what you guys mean by entities. I mean, that could go another route too. But based on what's going on as generations come and seeing history repeat itself, you also have to take that into account too, right? As I don't want to get too personal, but just seeing how everything goes down generational, with races or what have you. You know.
Yeah, it is.
That totally plays into.
There are. I never used to believe in curses or generational curses, things of that nature. But I absolutely. If you believe Jesus, if you believe the Bible, you believe in generational curses because we're suffering one. We've been handed one down that goes back to the beginning, Adam and Eve.
Right.
And God definitely talks about it. And I used to think, what kind of God is this? Why is he going to punish the third and fourth generations of someone based on the type of sin they commit? But it's not that God's actively doing it. I think the system, the code that he made for us, we've now discovered that if I go murder somebody and then I have a child, that child will have a scar on there'll be a mark on a particular DNA, somewhere on his DNA, and you will be able to track it. And they've done studies now where, twins get separated at birth. One's raised in a socially positive environment, the other in a negative. And the correlation of who ends up in trouble with the law, it doesn't matter. It's proving that it's very genetic. You guys.
So nurture versus
Right.
nature.
Right.
And I do think that it's a combination, without a doubt. So right now, all we have to go on, because I always wonder, why doesn't God just appear? But something happened in the fall where his appearing in front of us is harmful to us. It can kill us, apparently. Which, in a sense, makes sense, because if God is pure light and sin is darkness and there's darkness in it, and he can't... you put something as bright as the sun in here, there will be no shadows in this room. Anything that has the shadows will disappear. So if there's darkness in us and nothing but pure light, you're exposed to it, do you disintegrate or something? It's happened to people in the Bible. Maybe that's why. Point is this was the way he chose to communicate with us. In a lot of ways, it makes sense because it's a brilliant training and recruiting tool almost. But if you look at the numbers, if we look at the number of demons that fell, which was 10,000 times 10,000, and then the Bible goes on to say, and thousands after that. So if we're looking at 10,000 times 10,000, we're looking at, what is that, a billion?
What, 8 zeros?
Is that a billion? Yeah, a billion demons. That's 300 million. That's not a demon for every person. They're going to have to be efficient. They have a manpower problem. So you asked if the woman is on her way to heaven, that demon is not going to sit by peacefully. Like, this is where passages like Jesus saying that if you follow me, the world will hate you. One of the things, the demonic, it can turn people against you. It can, if you are with people that are polarized with an enemy spirit, that they'll find themselves pissed off at you, and they won't even know why. I even said this to Eric and KJ before we even got on our first show. Like, I knew this was going to happen. And it's spiritual attacks like that will happen to someone. When you start getting close to God and you start to hear the message that can get you into heaven, expect your life to have problems. Every dark spirit you've got in your life is going to turn your life upside down. It's going to separate you from the light, from the source of the true information. And it will do it through any way possible. Because the ramifications for that demon they're real for the demon. Here's where we get into the anecdotal, because the Bible doesn't talk about the individuality of demons. But they are individual, they are sentient.
Before you go further, let me ask you one more question.
Sure.
So do you believe that any interaction with anything non-carbon-based life form, like any an orb or a shadow or whatever, are you saying that all of that is covered under the demon blanket?
Well, we got to back up a little bit, because we got to talk about what you need, what is required to get into heaven. and that is belief that Jesus was the Son of God, that he came to earth, that he was crucified and rose. All you got to do is believe that. If you believe that in your heart for real, then you will start to do some things that will be obvious. And the Bible talks about those things. Like people that really believe Jesus will speak about Jesus at all costs, no matter what. You know, they're going to want to talk about it. Their heart will change. They go through all these things. If a demon is unsuccessful, and I'm synthesizing in very anecdotal, and you really got to take this with a grain of salt. I've seen a number of these, but the one that's off the top of my head was an exorcism with this demon named Anina. You can find it on YouTube. Just look up Demon Exorcism Anina. And one of the reasons it hit home is because the girl that was being exorcised had been a member of this church her whole life. So everyone in the congregation who's filming this and recording it has known this girl forever. She's not an actress. Okay, she wasn't brought in for whatever happened. They really believed it was something that was authentic. And the exorcist ended up, the deliverer, which is another name for exorcists, the deliverer ended up engaging this demon in a conversation. The demon said its name was Anina. The demon, despair is all I could say, utter despair. This is one of the best acting jobs if this was a written skit. But I personally believe, just it's in my heart, I believe that we were actually hearing from a demon speaking through this 16-year-old girl. And this demon talked about how she was tricked by Satan, or he. I don't know. It was associated with a female, so I'm calling it a she, but they technically don't have a gender. That because the deliverer was using the name of Jesus, this demon had to obey. And that is the authority that all demons have to obey. And the demon was beside itself because it was going to have to leave this girl. And she was on the verge, the demon was on the verge of having this girl killed while she was not a believer. But she became a believer like at the last second. The demon was going nuts, which is why the girl was going nuts. The deliverer says, you got to get out of this girl. And the demon acknowledged, I know. And the deliverer even had like compassion for the demon, like, I feel really bad for you because, and the demon was like, they're gonna send me back to hell. Satan is gonna beat me mercilessly for failing, and then I'll have to come back and find someone else to inhabit, to go get someone else for him. And that's what I do. I do that. That's what I've been doing since the beginning of time. Over and over. And they're going to do that until hell, which technically hell is not even open yet. They're in the waiting room for hell. They're like waiting for federal prison, but they're not in federal prison yet.
Like purgatory.
Well, see, you're talking possession, though. I'm still stuck on this.
You don't lose your salvation just because you interface with
No.
the demon.
No. But I guess what I'm asking is you have all these stories of people who have a loved one die, and that loved one appears in their room that night and basically says their goodbye or whatever. Like all these positive interactions that really don't amount to anything besides the fact that a person got some closure. You know what I mean? Like. I can't understand how that can all fall under.
Because if you believe
there's got to be more. If there can be
you believe
demons,
an entity that comes to you at night and says, "I'm your grandfather," if you believe that, you're proving that you don't believe the Bible, because the Bible says the exact opposite. It says demons are going to do that in the future. They are going to pretend to be angels of light. They're going to pretend to be good. They're going to pretend that they're going to make you feel warm and fuzzy. Do not get fooled by it. They are deceivers. Every last one of them. It is part of a deception.
Okay, and that's fine, and I can get that point, but I'm saying,
So
is there not more?
This is what hang on, let me finish the answer. So, by the simple fact that there is an entity saying that they're your dead grandfather, and God was very clear saying that all souls None of them will be walking around. If any of them say, if anyone says they're the disembodied soul of your, do not believe them. It is bull. All of them will be asleep until my day, Jesus' last day. And the ones that are dead, the believers in Jesus that died already, all throughout history, don't ask me how this is going to happen. Maybe this is where zombie movies come from, but they are going to rise from the dead. Do not ask me how. I used to have everything shown to me on paper, but maybe this is what faith is. I now believe so passionately in what this book says and what's going to happen that, well, it's rerouted my life because I should not be doing this. No way. So what did God say about, here's a few, I'm just going to read you a couple passages.
Okay.
And these are in random order. There was a ton of them. So Deuteronomy 18, 9 to 12. When you come into the land, so this is the Old Testament. This is the first 5 books of the Bible. This was given to Moses by God himself, letter by letter. Very specific that it be letter by letter. It reads like this. When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. Now, the nations, so they're in the desert. They're heading for what is going to become known as Israel today. But the land is filled with Canaanites, okay? And these dudes practice divination. They're channelers. They praise the other gods that have always been in this world, the ones the Greeks were behind, the ones the Romans were behind. They praise the fallen angels, those gods, which God has a big problem, the Creator God has a problem with. He goes on saying, there shall not be found among you anyone who burns his or her daughter as an offering, his son or daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens or a sorcerer or charmer or a medium. Now, a medium is someone that interacts with the spiritual world, or a necromancer, that's people that talk with dead spirits, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God is driving. So one of the reasons that Israel was going to get that land in the first place is that the people that had that land were committing these abominations, and God did not have a problem having them wiped out.
So prophets don't fall under that?
Prophets are channelers.
Prophet is a channeler. It is a medium, without a doubt. And God has a rule for that, which is to test the spirits. So in terms of prophets, and this is one of the reasons that he says try and find a mistake, because he says if a prophet ever says anything that is wrong, if a prophet ever makes a mistake, you take him outside and stone him to death immediately because he's a liar.
Wow.
Now, it seems like a serious overreaction. You got to think of it like this. I'm going to use a metaphor here. And I'm sorry, we'll talk about the protocols later, but this is important. Let's say a dad and 2 sons go out to get an ant farm. Okay? You following me? They get the ant farm, they bring it home. They've created life in its own enclosure in their living room. And the ants are doing their thing, and the boys are into it. It's something to do. They like the ants. They like creating new trails and ant farms and adding. You get the picture? Well, one of the boys, let's just say, gets jealous because the father and the son, they were bonding over this, and the jealous son decides to poison the ants. I'm going to kill them. Sorry, Lord. I need $1 for the jar. So jealous boy says, I'm going to kill them. They're getting joy from that. Screw them. So he poisons them. And he does something that is going to kill off this ant hive. What do they call it when ants? What's it called? Hill, whatever. Thank you, a colony. And it's a sad day. Everyone's sad. The dad is upset with son number 2, punishes that son. Maybe grounds him, sends him to another part of the house for a little while. You know what I'm saying? And, by the way, I'm not implying that Jesus and Satan are equal. They are not. Jesus was there at the creation. He is part of God. Satan is a created being, very, very different. So don't confuse that. So these ants are dying off. There's no future for them. The queen can't reproduce and make clean ants anymore. It's a lost crop. All right? However, the dad sits down with the good son and says, son, there is something we could do to save the ants, but you're going to have to suffer. You take this little drink here, and then for 3 weeks you're going to be on a bed, suffering, in pain, vomiting, cramps. That's the equivalent of God's suffering. He was on our timeline for 33 years and then suffered. He had to shed blood for us on purpose. And the reason that the father's talking to the good son about doing this is because in the course of allowing himself to get sick, the good son's going to create this enzyme, and if you inject that into the colony, it's going to clean the ants so that they can actually survive and end up living. Okay? So the metaphor is that is what the powers of heaven, in a sense, had to do to save us. I still wonder why God didn't just turn his back on humanity. I don't know. When I read in Genesis that after he'd made man, he looked around. He was grieved that he'd made. I don't know that. I felt that, man. I felt like ashamed. It's weird. Because if you read this book and the things, if God is real, we have an owner. And don't get me wrong, I did not like this information because I liked my freedom. I just got done writing last night, I'm a red-blooded American man. I like freedom. I like the choices that I grew up with. But it's crazy because even Thomas Jefferson in 1781 said, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is a just God. Now, he's saying that in 1781. How far have we fallen since then? Even in this last century, Satan's century. And how do we know it was Satan's century? Well, aside from the fact that impossible signs have occurred in the world, all as post signs to earmark the end of days, led by the regathering of the the nation of Israel. And hundreds of other prophecies, including prophecies of who the Eastern Bloc nations were going to be, who the Russians, who's going to be allied with the Russians, who's going to be allied with the Americans and the British and the Israelites. This was written 2,000 years ago. I am sorry, man. No way. There is no way that was done by a human. No way. You will never convince me of it. So when I read what God really wanted for us and what our purpose was and how far gone we are, it does. It makes me wonder why he even bothered. Why would Jesus even volunteer? He's a God. He's outside of time. Why would he come down to our level, cut himself from a whole dimension of existence, be on our timeline for 33 years, knowing he's going to end up having to shed blood? Because the way he died was predicted 800 years before it happened, before crucifixion even existed. Again, it's those predictions all throughout the history of this book, which every people's always been able to look back on and say that, wow, the future was predicted. By the time Jesus showed up, there were already thousands of people lining the streets of Jerusalem on that very particular day. Why?
Because it goes back much further than that.
Well, if you read the Old Testament carefully as a mathematician, and you can go online and you can see the breakdown. When you see this, you can't deny God exists. You have to actually you have to deny on purpose. But they'd figured out that it was going to be like 178,412 days. from the third decree of Artaxerxes until the day that the Son of God would walk into Jerusalem on a donkey. The real followers of the ancient scriptures were waiting outside Jerusalem that day. They already were there. There was no internet or printing. They were there because they knew what was going to be coming through there. They were able to line the streets with palm trees. And how do we know that that's true? Yeah, the Bible says it. Well, Pliny the Younger says it. He was a Roman scholar who, this story is affirmed not just from the biblical account, but it's confirmed from the Sadducees, from the other Hebrew religious group, the Pharisees. It was confirmed from the Romans, who basically was the rest of the Gentile world. That included governors in Africa that wrote about it. Not just Pliny the Younger, but Seneca, Josephus, all discussing the same story. And then when you see history trying to shut people like that up, trying to dismiss and discount them, you start to put an MO together that, wow, this story has been being undermined since 33 AD. Jesus changed things because it was it's a heavy response to take a prophet out and stone him. But think about the credibility that gives God. I'm not here just to sell you trinkets. I'm not looking to give away as many of these as possible. I'm looking for people that know how to jump through hoops. This is basically could be viewed, I'm a CEO, so I think like a business person. If I had just lost a third of my angels because they were jealous of something I was doing with this new, I might replenish heaven with the exact number of angels that fell, because there's a specific God is looking for a specific number of Gentiles. When that number is met, which is going to happen sometime after a generation after Israel is regathered, which puts us smack dab today. Before Jesus showed up, we did not have the ability to cast out a demon. We had no authority to do it. So once a demon got into your land, into your village, into your tribe, there was no way to get it out. And it's like the way the demon world operates, it's like a virus. They'll keep bringing more. If you have one little pathway open to one, and that's all sinning is. So when I read like Deuteronomy or Leviticus, where God's saying, don't talk to channelers, don't talk to mediums, I used to think it's because God, man, he's so boring. I mean, that's no fun. Hola, Charles. But in every case, it's always to protect us from something. Always. I mean, that's what Leviticus 18, 19. Go ahead, Helen.
Sorry.
No, what were you going to say?
I believe channeling comes through a person whether they want to see it or not. I mean,
Great.
Because I believe it's messages you need to hear, and I believe it might be from God or whoever. It can come in either way. That's
something that might feel like a gift, but that actually might even be a generational curse, as like an ability is handed down to you. And I do believe that is absolutely possible. And look, we're not talking about, because we respectfully disagree, not on whether the spiritual world exists, but we disagree on the rules that define how it operates.
Right.
And I believe it operates on the rules of the Bible. And I think you have an opinion that it operates a little more independent of that, which we have an ongoing debate about, which I love.
I could see both.
That's my thing is why does it have to be all or nothing? You know what I mean? So, yes, you could be absolutely right on everything you've said about demons and what they do. Why can't there be more than that?
Look, there could be.
There's a lot of experiences that say otherwise.
There is a passage where Jesus says, I've got sheep in other flocks. All right? And a lot of people look at that passage because that could theoretically be implying little green men from another planet. Is that where you were going? Because
guardian angels, stuff like that, things that like people are miraculously saved from disasters and from death by unexplained things, lifted them up and put them on the shore instead of drowning and stuff like that. Like there's, and I mean, you get into credibility and stuff with the stories, but the fact that there are so many stories of that nature, why is it? Could be a little good versus evil going on out there. Could be a little bit of both. Could be a little of both of those and some other stuff going on. We don't. I mean, yeah.
Oh,
you
without
say,
a doubt, I think the spiritual world interface, both the good and bad side, interfaces
Right.
a lot. And look, you got to understand something. Like the demons, they know each other. The demons know each other, and the demons know the angels. And now this came from someone that I believe is a real prophet of God. It doesn't matter because it's all imagination, if you want to just think of it like that. But he had been given this vision of life in heaven before the fall. And he was talking about what life was like there because he had been given this information to share with people. And people that understand God will still send prophets.
how does he know that that wasn't a demon that gave him that information?
Because you can test them. There's a test for demons and for any spirit, and that is a demon cannot say that Jesus is the Son of God. If for some reason it's physically impossible. They cannot acknowledge he's the Son of God. They cannot acknowledge that he rose from the dead. They really can't even be in the same room with his name. It's something. Maybe it's what God is for the light. The light in us is hurtful to them. I don't know. I'm not pretending to know. But when I don't know, what I can do is just go back and tell you what God wrote. He wrote it amongst the other words he wrote when he predicted the future without any mistakes. And that one I can see with my own eyes because I can follow history. And now that we've got the internet, we have access to every library that's ever existed. So yeah, there's pornography on the internet, but the truth of the world is also there too. And we have access to it for a little bit longer.
What we're allowed to have access to.
Yeah, and that's being manipulated with more than people can imagine.
Yeah, for
A couple more passages.
centuries upon centuries.
Because when something is important to God, he doesn't say it once. He repeats it and repeats it and repeats it over and over and over and over and over. So to answer your questions, how do we know that prophets weren't making the same mistake that the channeler of today is making? Number one, prophets have to test the spirits. They cannot acknowledge. So I always say, anyone that if you think you're talking to your dead grandpa, ask your dead grandpa if he can just say Jesus was the Son of God. If he can't do it, there's a little clue. We also know that if a prophet makes even one mistake,
How are they supposed to say? How are they supposed to?
If they're prophesizing, that's usually future.
How is that supposed to be?
because many of the prophecies
Proven
are
through
immediate.
spirits.
Many of the prophecies are like, this is going to happen right now. Like, you can gather 400 of your guys. I'm going to light
is
that
up.
water on fire. You guys won't be able to light this balsa wood stack on fire. Little things like that, like visible to the peoples that were around. Like, that was always being proven. Always. And it was always God's prophet up against essentially the equivalent in Satan's kingdom, which were the magicians, the channelers. They even had the ability, Satan's demons apparently had the ability to turn a cane into a snake. Don't ask me how, man.
Yeah, people were simpler too back then, though, because as science evolved, science was the devil, which included arithmetic. Mathematics was, the work of the devil.
Well,
I
do you
mean,
think
so
we're
this
less
is.
smart? Do you think we're more knowledgeable today or less knowledgeable?
I think we're more knowledgeable.
I think we're way less.
How are we less knowledgeable? We are more lazy today. We have devices like our phones and that
Well, what knowledge
us
is it
figure out.
do we have that's so important? If the power were shut off tomorrow, how long would we make it?
If the power were shut off a couple hundred years ago, they wouldn't have known what power was to begin with.
Exactly. So if you're comparing us to, the American Revolutionary Soldier of 1776, he would be genius compared to us because we have no knowledge of. I mean, what would we do without a smartphone?
I think
This
some of
wasn't-
us are
we
still
didn't-
capable without a smartphone. Yeah.
We did not earn, each one of us on an individual level did not earn this knowledge. It's just there. We didn't have to do anything to get it. We don't know what its value is. And but you can find out what it is. Take that phone away for even a weekend. You want to do a little family building exercise? This weekend, Friday. And this has kill a couple birds with one stone because you can actually prep for something that a lot of people, whether you're biblical or not, believe is coming to this world, and that is some tough times. Turn the power off on Friday. Have a camp out with your family and keep a list of all the things you go to do for granted. Oh, I can't do that. We don't have power. Oh, I can't do that. I can't get the car out of the garage.
But you can take that statement all the way back to where people were walking around in robes and open-toed sandals.
That's what they knew.
Because with every advancement, the only thing that doesn't advance through time is time. We are still stuck under the same umbrella of a 24-hour day, unless you're in Alaska or whatever. But time doesn't change with every advancement that we get as a species or whatever. Time never changes. So, yeah, the more that's presented to us, the more things that we have to do, of course you're going to have to make sacrifices in other times. But you could do this all the way back to the beginning of time. What did Adam and Eve have to do?
This
Not a
might
darn
be,
thing.
Really off
They
topic,
just.
but don't you think that kind of ties into like man becoming machine? You know what I mean? Tied into the phone and then electronics and then like technology. Like that's, to me, that kind of ties into it. Like there's a message there I think that is part of the devil or Satan, what have you. To not be so.
You have a dog, Al,
Yeah.
right?
Addicted
For
to the-
all
you know.
for all the advancements of technology and all the evils that you can find in them, you can also find a
Yes.
ton of great things. People
Absolutely.
walk again, they see again,
Yeah. Oh,
they hear
yeah.
again, all because of advances in technology.
Yes,
So
to believe
Without,
in.
I make no blanket
agree.
statements. That's why I never like to say technology is bad. Look, technology is
It's not.
being used to get the word of God out to the world. So
Right.
Yep.
everything, including each individual person, I think has a line of good and evil going through it. Anything, a computer can be used for good or evil. Technology can be. I'm with you on that. Knowledge in and of itself is not evil. But selling of knowledge is one of Satan's 3 lies. There were 3 lies in the garden, and he's still doing them. And the people that are behind the New World Order, the rich, the elite, the billionaire elite, they truly believe that they are about to do something good for the human race, that we are about to ascend. We're much further along in our ability, in our transhumanistic technology. We are, it's not, we grew up in the $6 million man, okay? That's sort of like regular now to have robotic people. I mean, we've got guys in Olympics that have metal legs now.
right.
And Satan's promise to the elite is to live forever. That's one of the things he's promising them. And he's doing it through some funky ways of capturing. And I don't know how you capture a soul, and souls can apparently be transferred. The Bible's littered with it. A lot of the idols we have, the things we have, can be a little house for a spirit. Not sure how. But the existence of that spirit world, we all agree there's something there. And I will also say this, because I'm not interested in winning an argument just to win. I'd rather be right. Some people never want to lose an argument, so they'll never be right. It takes a certain kind of person to admit they're wrong. And I would admit it in a second if you could show me a few things. And I've been looking because I would like... this is not how I really feel anymore. But there was a while where I wanted to find a loophole in the covenant that God had made with humanity. Because I'm covered in that covenant. And regardless of what I think the purpose of humanity is or what my purpose is, there is a higher being that created us. And we were created for him, not for ourselves. The same way you get a dog, what can your dog do? What could Adam and Eve do? Nothing. Have a relationship with God. That's it. That's all your dog can do. It can't even poop without you. Literally. And it's kind of, if you think about it, well, hang on. My point is he needs you for everything. For food, for his health, you've got to drive to veterinarians. You've got to get out on snowy mornings to walk or let him out. You've got to clean up his accidents.
In captivity.
Yes, because we've taken them as pets. Yeah.
Away from their natural environment. Otherwise, they don't need us at all.
So you're sitting here, in a sense, suffering a little bit for the joy because it outweighs. Well, I think that's what happened in heaven is God said he wanted to make us for relationship. If you are the supreme being and have created everything, and I wouldn't be surprised if this is why so many quantum physicists convert to Christianity. Because we've discovered something unbelievable. And I think this is how God might be connected to everything and why everything is connected. Because when you get down to the smallest size particle possible, it's called a Planck particle. It's after a scientist called Max Planck. P-L-A-N-C-K. This was astounding to scientists because theoretically we should be able to take any dimension, height, time, width, spatial, and keep cutting it in half for infinity. But there's actually a limit, not just to matter, but even to segments of time, like how small we can get them. And then on the macro, the big side, we also know that there's a limit to the universe. So this thing has an edge. This thing has a floor and a ceiling. Means there's something around it. This is what's freaking scientists out, is that they're coming to the realization that we are living in a manufactured world. Some of them call it a digital representation.
It's like a game system.
I learned that when you couldn't disprove the matrix. Like it could be happening, but you wouldn't necessarily know it.
Well, everything has a beginning and an end, and it would drive you absolutely insane if you tried to figure out how everything started.
Yep.
Because everything has to start somewhere, and that's what, like even in a circle, there still is a start point. There's always a start point, and there's always an end point. If you go back far enough, if you go forward far enough, there is a beginning and an end. And so how did the beginning start? Who started the beginning? And that's where I get a headache. I take a couple Motrin and watch football.
That's where every
it's too much.
evolutionist doesn't have an answer either.
Right.
Because no one has proven how life was created. We can't do it. Mathematically, we can disprove evolution.
I think the only way that you could ever prove it is to prove mathematics wrong.
Mathematician, I haven't put the quotes out yet, but probably the strongest, I'm putting out these quotes. I don't know if you guys read those, but the strongest part of this book are the scientists and the mathematicians that converted. The biggest part of the book, believe it or not, is against something I believed in my entire life, evolution. Because at the end of the day, the only three guys we hear of that have really, that have built our belief system about evolution. We're talking about Richard Dawkins, Larry Nye, what's his name?
Bill Nye?
Bill Nye, Michio Kaku, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Those are the Illuminati figureheads. The vast majority of science, like in collegiate circles, scientists that have, it's unbelievable the amount of them that have converted to Christianity. Do you guys think Einstein was a Christian or not?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
But he was very spiritual.
Yeah.
One of his quotes was that they're along the lines of he gets really pissed off when people use his work to claim there was no God, because he said his work proves there is one. Because this balance in this universe cannot exist. No way. Too many things. there's too many symbiotic creatures. A symbiotic creature proves God. It's the chicken and the egg situation. Because, yeah, it fraggles your brain.
Yeah.
Because it's got to have a start and an end, but
Yep.
that doesn't.
That proves it.
And it's why God says, he goes, people will be condemned alone on the creation. Meaning, if you look at creation and you don't realize this was made by God, you're right there, you're condemned. Now, we're condemned we're condemned before we're born. It's not because God's an asshole. It's because he runs a holy empire, a clean one. And look, if I was the CEO of a business and I was recruiting a bunch of new guys, I have the best company in town. I'll tell you one way I could screw it up is to let any old riffraff come in or let a lot of people get into my organization through a different set of rules or much more easily than the guys that had to work for it. If I want to create some anima, I could do that. So God's got some limitations here because he cannot lie. He says that.
Even with humanity, though, like take heaven for instance. There's got to be, at what point does heaven have enough? You know what I mean? At what point is heaven full? At what point what is this is just a cycle over and over and over again. At one point there'll be a battle here on earth, right? And then to the victor goes the spoils.
But I don't view this as this unending like there is a finite, whether you believe in evolution or creation, there is a beginning to time. There was, whether it was a singularity, the Big Bang, or it was the moment God, something began. And if I don't want to get too philosophical, but if you start to incorporate the idea that there's limits to the largeness and smallness of the universe, and that entropy exists, the law that things break down, eventually this will end. That way that you should So whatever this experiment, this human life, whatever this thing is we call existence, it was designed on purpose by something outside of us with a specific start time and an end time. I believe, to the point of death, like this has been now proven to me. There's how else beyond willing to die for an idea. I don't know how else to say I support an idea. Or that how much more can you believe in one?
I guess I just see it as we know that this time here on Earth is a speck in our existence.
Not. I mean,
right?
you already know how.
Yeah.
Turn 50. You know how fast it goes. Well, you're not 50.
No,
yet,
not yet. Jeez. Oh, come on
turn
now,
40.
easy.
Thanks for forwarding.
I'm halfway.
You
there.
guys are all youngsters
So-
here. I'm the only one that probably maybe Charles. But
So let's say, and listen, this is not an argument. I'm a questioner. I love
this.
So by nature, we get bored with things. So let's say you live your life right. You get in and through the pearly gates and you're in heaven for, say, the equivalent of what we feel is 30 years. And you're like, you know what? This is so boring now. Like, I'm so over this. Like, yeah, this is great.
The honest truth.
Then what?
I've actually thought
Can you
about
go
that.
back? So if you can go back in another body, now is reincarnation not biblical, but I don't know how you.
This
you know
book
what I mean?
would have to be a lie for that to be true. Because the book, God is very specific. Your soul is here once. You die once.
Right.
You do not come back.
Well, and that's what I'm asking. I don't want to do anything for eternity. There is nothing I can think of
Dude,
that
I've
I want to
actually-
do for eternity.
I had the same thought myself. Because I'm sitting here. Because for me, this has been the most unbelievable. It's like a mental treasure hunt almost inside you, because you're just thinking, philosophizing. Oh God. Tell me what you were just saying again.
There's nothing I can think of in this life or in any life that I would want to do for eternity.
All right,
like
so-
eternity. I don't need eternity.
Okay, so
you know what I mean?
Here's what I was trying to get at.
Assuming you're in the same form, right? That if eternally you change form. Like,
Right.
how old is the water in that beer you drink? It's eternal, apparently. It's always been here. It just converts and changes form.
Hop on a mic if you're gonna.
No, that makes sense. The whole the rain cycle on that, and
Energy is
I've had the same fear
Transforming
because I have a fear of boredom. Like for me, it is. I don't know why. Like the idea of.
it could be like, Dave, you love bowling. You go to heaven. You can bowl 1,000,000 games. You know, and after like 100,000, you're like, I can't stand bowling anymore.
All right, I've
Now you can go for 400 games of putt-putt.
I don't have an
you know?
answer to that,
Right.
Because I thought about that. But here's a few things that
I mean, I don't want to burn in fire forever either. But there's
Exactly.
nothing I want to do forever.
my choice is. So look, God wants us to have a choice. He created a choice because I don't think God realized this. I think God knew this ahead of time, and He was going to have to create evil to create a choice because you don't know. You need a choice to measure things. You need a reference point. So right now, God created this choice, which is you can choose His kingdom or not. If you choose it, you're in. It's 3 simple things any person can do. It is not about your physical abilities or what you do. It's simply about what you believe. And if you really believe, then you will do some things that will be visible to others.
Or you cannot believe your entire life, but at the very end, ask for forgiveness and be accepted.
As
I mean,
long
how
as
does
you
that-
are breathing and I think you authentically ask for forgiveness and you repent and ask God to take you, even if you're on your last breath, I suspect that, yes, you can. Jesus was hanging next to 2 other guys, and He said to one of them, truly, I tell you today, you will be in paradise. Now, paradise is heaven's waiting room, because heaven is not open yet for human. Heaven and hell are not open yet. The waiting rooms are. When this human experiment wraps up, then they go into business. They're still in a place where there's a ton of suffering, and the people that are going to heaven are in a place where it is happier than hell, and they love it.
So when you die and stand in front of St. Peter, is that who you go in front of? Is that who? I'm not Catholic, but
No,
I
I don't.
Who is this?
Well, St. Peter, pearly gates, but I think
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
going to be standing in front of Jesus Christ.
Well, I mean, whoever, the way it is, and then this is the other problem I have is because these different sects of religion that have different stories about what happens and what you can do, what you can't do, blah blah blah. I have the biggest problem I have is that if they're, to me, if the supreme being, because I believe that there is
Why-
a source energy that
Why
has done
complicate
this.
it? Look, religion is man's way to try to reconcile themselves with God.
Salvation
It's a
is very
flawed
personal.
institution. Forget religions aren't close to this book. Pretty much every man-made religion, because God said, enough of this.
So what makes that the right book over the next book or the other book?
Because
or
this
whatever,
book has a characteristic that no other book in history has.
which is what?
It predicted the future with 0 mistakes. No other book can do that. There's 2,000 prophecies in here. 1,500 of them have already happened. In the last 8 years, I have looked into them personally. I don't have an exact number, but it's going to be between 200 and 300. Can't really say all are prophetic. For instance, when I used to scoff at the notion that the Jews were led out of Egypt and the Red Sea parted and, Moses, come on. And I was devouring Science Channel shows that could scientifically explain how at the right time with the moon and gravity and a wind, you could get it clear enough where you could. Okay. Because because the Bible story can't be true.
That's the second biggest problem I have. Is
But hang
that
on, but-
why don't these things happen now?
They do happen now.
How?
You might be able to see them right now, but you just don't recognize them for what they are. You can go Google, YouTube, angels. I want to see them in motion. You'll see.
If I see a statue crying in Mexico and Jesus shows up on a piece of toast, that is not the equivalent of the burning bush or the parting of the Red Seas, and like these
so my thing
are
with the Red Sea is,
Analogy.
as I was going further. Now, I didn't go out to disprove the Red Sea. This one sort of fell onto my lap. One day while I was looking for something else, I came across photographs that this diver in the late 1970s took who was looking for a sunken treasure, and he's in the Red Sea. And what does he end up photographing?
I've saw that.
Dozens
yes.
of Egyptian chariots at the bottom of the Red Sea under
Right.
100 feet of water. Are you
At low
kidding
tide.
me? And there's only one book in history that ever explained this event. Now, you keep doing that over and over. You do that for 8 years. And everything you look at is a rubber stamp. Affirmation, affirmation. Wait a minute. Isaiah said that Egypt wouldn't be lost as a nation, but that her greatness would never, Egypt would exist, but it would be a poor nation for the rest of history. How weird. 4,000 years later, it's still around. I mean, nations come and go. By itself, it doesn't sway anything. It's another grain of sand. You throw it in the out. You keep doing it. And eventually you're left with, there's no grains. I mean, there is nothing left. Like I said, I've probably looked into over 200. Just around the fulfillment of Jesus showing up in 32 or whatever AD to Jerusalem. Now, we look at the Bible as all written at the same time by some guys with cigars in some back room. It was written over a span of 1,500 years.
That's the other point, is what we consider to be prophecies could be stories of what has already transpired.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you've got to this is not a book you just read superficially and get it. In fact, everyone that starts reading, once you start reading this, you'll never stop, because there are so many. God even says it is the glory of God to hide a treasure in the Bible, and it is the glory of kings to seek it out. And there are unbelievable nuggets. Bible code guys, which I'm somewhat familiar with, wouldn't surprise me that they are pulling out names like Dallas and Kennedy and assassination and all these words grouped together. It's very possible that, because it's a 4-dimensional book, we read it like 3-dimensional people, very superficially. But you can actually, you can read it from any angle. Like if you could take a laser and try and imagine the work laid out on a 3-dimensional cube, and if you could shoot a laser in any direction, a straight line, whatever letters it goes through, and no matter how you do it, has a thought of God. Which is what these Bible code guys are finding, that, oh my gosh, when you use the letter sequencing skip, the most common form of it's what's the term? The intelligence term for when you secure information, encrypting it. I don't know where I was going with that, but
When you use the letter sequencing.
oh, the letter skipping. So here's a basic one that was discovered before computers, which was, I think, hard to discover. Now, we've discovered things like this through the rafters, but because evil, i.e. Satan, is in charge of our media, and we weren't able to get to the protocols of the learned elders, which lays out Satan's plan for taking control of the media amongst their 24 plans of world domination. It's not a Jewish conspiracy, folks. It's blamed on the Jews for a purpose. It's a demonic conspiracy. It's very true. The document authenticates itself. People came out calling it a fake in 1920. You can't call it a fake in 1920 when history hasn't happened yet. Letter sequencing, skipping. So there's codes all over the Bible. One of the simple codes is skipping letters. So take the first 5 books of the Bible, and I think this is why Jewish scholars are told that if you get even one letter wrong, you will destroy the universe. Because if you get one letter wrong, the little system of reading this Bible in any direction would fall apart. So the first 5 books of the Bible, we've got Genesis, Exodus, what's the middle one? Is it Leviticus? Deuteronomy, and or what's the Numbers? Maybe you can figure that out.
Let me stop you right there. Before you get any further in this thought, the Bible was originally written in Latin, correct?
No.
No? What was it?
Aramaic.
Okay, so now converted to
Greek.
So with the original Aramaic version, these things work? Are some of these Bible code people using
Wonderful question. No, this works in the original.
only?
This works in the original Hebrew, like the original Aramaic.
Right.
Hebrew is.
So I see videos and shows on these Bible code people, and they're using the
Septuagint?
English version, the King James version of, and it's like, wait a second. If it works on this one, then it doesn't work on the original.
Hang on. If you are watching video, now I'm seeing the devil operating here. Because in my opinion, Bible codes are real. God did put codes in the Bible. And I was about to describe a very basic code. Now, what does Satan always do? He dismisses and he... So if Bible codes are real, expect a show that seems like it's taking a genuine, authentic look into Bible codes, but it will end up coming to the conclusion that it's a total farce when it's not. That is what we get on our cable. It's one of the big shit, and I didn't realize these things until I actually got into filmmaking. But the way the world used to work is you'd make a film with a message, and then you'd go sell it to somebody. Sometimes the studio would. What's happening now is the History Channel's hiring their own filmmakers to make the documentaries of the stories that they just want to make. It's how the Smithsonian is part of this system, as the curators are in on it. They take the giant bones, go lose them in the back, and they keep the little paper mache draw-ups of the monkey evolution. They keep that where the people can see it.
The giant bones of the dinosaurs that aren't in the Bible?
The what?
The giant bones of the dinosaurs that aren't in the Bible?
I think they are.
You were right about those 5 too, by the way. In the Old Testament.
Oh, okay. The Bible talks about a behemoth. It's a giant creature of some sort. It's huge. I think it even breathed fire. I'm not sure. So the code that was in, the basic code that's in the first 5 books of the Bible is, here's an example. You can go find this one. I learned this one from Chuck Missler. So the name of the Bible, the Torah, you need to understand, Aramaic doesn't really have vowels. So Torah is T-O-H-R. Okay, the ah sound is, there's no letter for it. And if I got the letters mixed up, forgive me, but the example is true. So in the book of Genesis, if you read, you take every 7th letter, start from the beginning, it spells out Torah. Okay, not a big deal. You go to the book of Exodus, same thing. You read every 7th letter, it spells out Torah. Huh. 2 in a row. Okay.
It spells out this 4-letter word.
Yeah.
So there's only 28 letters in that book.
No. You start from the beginning. You're only going to go 4 letters in, and you've got the word Torah.
Oh, okay. So it just of the first 28 letters, you'll spell it with the 7th. Okay, I got you.
There's hundreds of these, thousands of these even. All right, so then you go to, is Leviticus the 3rd book? I'm pretty sure it is. You go to Leviticus, there's no code. Oh, okay. Then you go to Numbers, is that number 4?
Yes, I believe so.
Numbers has the code, but it's backwards. It's not T-O-H-R, it's R-H-O-T. Huh, that's weird. So then you go look in Deuteronomy. How weird. There it is again. It's backwards. So you've got, of the first 5 books that were here, God's original message to humanity. This is what guided the world for the first few thousand years that we were in business. The first 2 books of the Bible and the last 2 books of the Bible jointly are pointing together to this middle book, Leviticus. But we already went through Leviticus every 7th letter trying to figure out what is written It didn't say anything. However, because God operates on sevens, you take the 7 times the 7, and you count every 49th letter, and it spells out the name of Jesus Christ 3,000 years before he got here. That is how. It's that times hundreds of those. It could not have been in writing before it happened unless it was written by God. Because his name was not used on purpose until the New Testament. The name Jesus did not exist, but all of a sudden, these codes in the Bible are pointing you to his name in the Old Testament 2,000 years before he showed up on earth. That is the Son of God. So you better find out what he had to say about mediums and channels, and because he's the one that holds the keys to that kingdom. It's not Peter. You need to have your relationship with him. What time we got?
We've got about 7 minutes left.
Any thoughts or questions on anything I've said that you guys are like, oh, well, he's just off.
Well, no, you know how I am. I do believe in something. It's not quite as structured as the Bible or an organized religion, for that matter. And I wonder. I'm full of wonder, I guess you could say. I do believe that there. I mean, obviously, you have to believe that something created everything. Otherwise, how else would it exist to begin with? Like, yeah, okay,
well,
maybe
I used to believe randomness is why we were here.
Yeah, maybe the Big Bang happened or whatever, but where did that come from? You know what I mean? Like, everything comes from somewhere.
Nothing exploded and it became something.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about. So,
great question. It's not a reason to not believe he never was created, so he didn't. But
right.
I have these questions too,
but
including the one, what am I going to do if I get bored in heaven? I never answered that one, by the way, because Chuck Missler had a great answer.
I still wonder, honestly, I wonder if it's not quite as precise as it's made out to be. If there's a little bit of truth in everything, if there's a little bit of truth in Buddhism, if there's a little bit of truth,
there is.
Yeah, like so.
You don't counterfeit something by making it. A counterfeit dollar is made to look like a dollar, but it's not a dollar. A counterfeit expert can tell the difference. So,
but think of these.
Any religion that believes in a God, how funny that so many of them, they keep being counterfeited. You don't. What is it that, in order to counterfeit something, there's got to be the original,
right?
The real original. So what is it that's being counterfeited at the end of the day? That there's a God up there, that he created us, that there was a flood. I mean, all religions share these stories.
Right. But originally, religion was regional. So, with a very similar message. So that just leads me to wonder, okay, well, maybe some of the things in these other religions that Christians kind of, that's, you got the wrong religion, pal. You know what I mean? Like, maybe some of these things also may have happened. Maybe the blanket of God and Jesus and that goes a little bit larger than the Christian and Jewish religions, and even the Muslim religions like I said,
want to. I'm not religious.
Admit,
I think there's a big distinction between religion and believing the words in this book. I'm not a religious guy. I don't go to a building.
Right.
God said there should be no priests. Jesus was very clear like that. I'm not a religious guy.
But you will be, I mean, if you question these things, you get, basically shunned throughout the community, and I think you're doing yourself and everyone else a disservice by not questioning, because we know that
how to talk about
right because that book has been altered so much, and there's so much missing from that book that we're not allowed to know about. And there's a reason for that. Why is that reason?
And where does
but hang on, where did you get that idea?
What's that?
The idea that so many things have been changed in this book, and there's things missing from the book.
I watch all kinds of stuff. I read all kinds of stuff about it because I'm honestly very curious about it.
A lot of it is changed.
And it's for what purpose? The whole purpose of what we were going to talk about tonight.
Translation.
Control.
Well, that's going to be the tool ultimately that this book says Satan's going to use to, in a sense, trap us. He's going to get us to believe we don't need salvation, which has worked with most people. The world, the way it is today, is so different than it was for almost 1,800 years since Jesus Christ was here.
I think it's very personal. Salvation's very personal.
It, without a doubt, you are not saved by your friends. You're not saved by your job, how many people you make laugh. If you help people by pulling over to fix their flat on the side of the road, you are not saved for those reasons.
I believe that stuff helps, though. I believe that there's basically a
Yes, it does.
goodness meter in your heart,
Oh, yeah.
and that plays a lot larger role than
doubt.
people
In
want to
fact,
believe.
Yes.
One of the reasons I think that this whole human experiment,
Yes.
that this could be one big training exercise, is because
Yes.
God says that He goes, I've got angels on earth, and you may be dealing with some of them sometimes unaware of it.
Right.
Thank you. Oh, yeah.
No, thank you. I love her.
I just
Which
wonder,
implies
like,
to me, like, maybe if you're the type of person that you do pull over to help people with their own, maybe God might take some extra interest in you because you've got the type of heart and He's going to throw some extra resources at trying to light you up. I do not know. I do not know how that happened. I know I shouldn't have. I feel lucky as hell because now that I read this and I'm trying to understand God's heart, when I read this, I feel like a Nazi reading about the crimes of the Holocaust is how I feel. No, I wasn't personally responsible for it, but I'm categorized in this group. Does that make sense? So when I was reading this, like trying to read it from God's perspective, I felt ashamed. I don't know if you can even have that feeling.
you can't read it from his perspective. That's the whole thing, is you don't know.
I disagree with that. We are a very selfish society, and everything is me, me, me. Find your own happiness. Love yourself. Yeah, self, me. God. Okay. The Christian message is the exact opposite. It's to try to find empathy and compassion, to put yourself, okay, instead of just being angry at this person for saying this, what might they have been feeling? Let me put myself in their shoes. Okay, they're in a tough spot, and they're just lashing out at the people they love. We're supposed to do that. And I just put on my CEO hat. I'm like, okay, well, if I was starting a business, which I'm starting for my own pleasure and my own, and I had people walking around like they own the place, that might piss me, they just assume they're going to be employed because I put an ad in some paper which says wear a tie and bring a cover letter, and they show up without a tie and a cover letter and then get pissed when I don't want to interview them.
We got to wrap.
I wouldn't be surprised if God isn't. We were made in His image, so the things we feel and
God knows your heart.
He does at the end of the day. No human can save you. That's between Helen. I think you said it best. It's very personal. I mean, nothing could be more personal. So, thanks for coming. It was good.
Thank you.
I'm glad. And I'm glad, Al.
Good.
Yeah, sorry to occupy your original content with.
To be honest, this is why we used to do our shows without topics.
Right.
Because this was a way better show than force feeding the pro. Because those will be. We can always talk about those next week. This was way better, and we might go back to this. To be honest with you, so. All right, everyone.
Great.
At the end of the day, we didn't really talk about evil so much. So we did a little bit. It's not to glorify it, not to sell it. At the end of the day, if I'm wrong about what I'm saying, no big deal. Al, I love you. With all due respect, if Al's wrong about what he's saying, his eternity is screwed. So be careful.
I'm ready to be.
I love
I'm ready
you,
to
baby.
be wrong and proven wrong. That's the whole thing. Is
We will be back next week for a